So you should be able to find it on the Apex Pro page now.
Cool.
And we'll just chat for a minute while some folks join, and then I'll jump into a quick intro and thank some of our partners that support the show.
All right.
I'm going to do some sharing as well on my other computer over here. So I was actually tire shopping for my wife's car yesterday, and there weren't any Toyos. I don't think there were any Toyos, actually, now that I think about it, in the category that I was looking. But that can't be true now that I'm thinking. There had to have been.
You have a lot of options.
Yeah, I was about to say. So what size company is Toyo compared to like the Goodyears and Michelins of the world?
Pretty small.
Yeah.
Though it's funny, you made me think how like in my job interview, I think it was a Toyo, I described my liking for the company to be that like we're kind of the underdogs of the motorsports industry. There's, as far as like if you want to compare just like scale of the company and budgets and all that, I'm not going to say capabilities because you're capable of a lot, but we do have to make a lot out of fewer resources than what these other companies do. So yeah, I just always found it cool when you show up to like some of these off-road races or like Baja 500 and 1000 and we're stacking up wins. It's something to be a little proud of, to just be like, yes, we're the little guys and we took them down.
Yeah, that's awesome. I remember when another tire brand was running the Falcon, Porsche was running in IMSA against all the Michelin teams and would routinely do really well. And that's kind of what I think of when I think of Toyo, is like the scrappy, like we're putting out really good product and probably have a lot of really fast drivers that really like our tires, but we don't have, we're not the title sponsor of Le Mans.
Yeah.
That's a totally different deal. And I think being in our position, electronics or other people that sell stuff that are products that you only need one of for a very long time in your race car, the motorsports world seems like a small space, but I'd imagine particularly for tire companies, but other consumable companies, brake pad manufacturers and fuel manufacturers, that the motorsports industry is a very, very significant space, because not only do people that participate in motorsports consume vastly more tires than the average consumer, but they also influence the purchases of the average consumer, because they're always the ones who's everybody's buddies are saying, hey man, I need new tires on my XYZ, help me out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there are benefits all around to it. I mean, especially when you get in, as like a partner or sponsor with some series, it's like, cool, we get to sell tires, we get the marketing benefits out of it, we get to sell to race cars specifically, which means lots of unique or larger sizes, and then in slick tire compounds. So it's kind of a double whammy in lots of cases, where it's just like, cool, it's a profit generator as well as a marketing tool. It's not often that you get two in one.
Yeah, that's really cool. And that's something that I've thought about for a long time with just businesses around motorsports. Is like, man, the tire companies, that's where you want to be as far as the profitability potential. But for everybody that's joined and watching the stream, really appreciate you being here. Give us a like or a share. If you are participating in a Facebook group or have another community of folks that you think would be interested in this information, make sure to share it, because I'm pretty sure we'll be uncovering some cool stuff about tires. We might be able to tell you what tire pressures you should run, with the big caveat of it depends. And we'll just be offering hopefully some cool information, but share this around, hit the wow face, the love button, whatever mood you're in. Give us that indication there. And that helps a lot. Also, leave a comment and let us know what's your favorite Toyo tire. If you're running a Toyo, which tire do you prefer? Are you running in a spec series and you have to run one of their tires? And what do you like about it? If you're not running a Toyo, tell us what you're running. We're not afraid to hear what else is out there, right?
But, I want to hear that stuff. I'll be writing it down.
Yeah, there you go. Absolutely. That'll be good data points for Cameron. So let us know what tires are on your track car. And we've already got a couple of questions that we'll start with here in a couple of minutes, but I just wanted to let Cameron have the opportunity to introduce himself, because we met back in February at Instructor Summit in Indianapolis, and learned a lot from listening to Cameron talk about what we're going to talk about now. But also realized that we were apparently in a race together in different classes, but on the track at the same time a couple years ago. So
yeah,
that was pretty cool.
Yeah. So yeah, as you're saying, my name is Cameron Parsons. I work with Toyo Tires, so I manage their officially it's competition and specialty products. So it's kind of a mix. I get to work with motorsport stuff as well as winter tires, like our our Observe line or and our Celsius tires, the all-weather products. But on top of that, competition entails things like our on-road and off-road motorsports efforts. So the Proxys, R1R, R888R, RR, lots of those spec tires, those all fall under my wing, as well as things like our Baja 500 and Baja 1000 winning open country OPMT R for racing. So, it's a whole mix. I got to change gears every now and then with like, what am I working on today? Where's this development? Where's that? But I don't know, keeps things interesting for my day job.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like a lot of fun to be involved on that side of things and understand, the motorsports world from that angle. So I went ahead and dropped a comment on the mainstream here for folks to let us know what tires they're running, and particularly if they're running a Toyo tire, what you like about it, just to kind of start some conversation. But Cameron, if you see any comments on there that you want to address as well, you might be looking at different places than I am, and we can jump into those. But I figured we would answer a couple of questions that I kind of already served up to you from a user on the Apex Pro users group. And he jumped in when I posted about Cameron being there. He was very excited and had lots of tire related questions. And that was John Seegers. So I'll pull up his questions real quick. And we already kind of talked about him briefly, but I think he's running a front wheel drive car for hill climbs, and was wondering what kind of tire you recommend when you don't have much opportunity to warm it up. And you're running, 1 to 2 mile runs that maybe take a minute or two at the most.
I mean, for that, it's the characteristics you're looking for. Then it's something soft and something that can heat up quick, right? So that's generally when you are looking at R and slick tire compounds. If you're looking at within the Toyo's wheelhouse, pretty much, kind of depending on what your class rules are, it would be anywhere within. I'm going to assume you're not running an 18-inch wheel. I'm not sure, but like basically the RS1 is our like top of the line slick racing tire. If you're having to run DOT rules, we have the Proxys RR, which is 2 groove slick, and it's still running that soft racing compound. And then we also have the R888R, which depending if it's a mixed surface hill climb, that one could end up being your best bet, because the RR, like I said, it's 2 groove slick. It's not too happy in conditions aside from dry. R888R, it still absolutely works best in the dry. But if dirt gets kicked up on the course, or if you've got some damp spots here and there, it would have a little more versatility to it. It's got some more tread openings and grooving to it. So a lot of it depends on the class rules, but those would be the 3 that I place at the top. And if we're talking just like perfect conditions, dry tire, it's RS1 at the top, RR next, R888R right after that.
Yeah, great input. I like, especially in a hill climb environment, I would imagine, depending on the organizer and how the events run, you might not have course cleanup in between cars being sent up the hill. So being able to deal with a tricky surface would probably be important. So
yeah,
maybe you want to look
and
at that.
if you can take a trip to Europe, they do have the R888 XD listed on their website, which is a rallycross tire. So if you can take a trip to Europe and grab some tires there and bring them back, you might find that to be ideal.
Yeah, cool. Getting the real scoop there. So John also asked, is there such a thing as a real rain tire or full wets? And he referenced the RA1 and the R888 and said, yeah, I'd love a set of those in the rain, right? He was wondering, basically, is there such a thing as a real rain tire? Maybe what the differences are. And then what about using a street tire in the rain as opposed to a competition tire?
Yeah, it's cool. We've actually seen some interesting solutions to this. So normally what we push the most is the Proxys RA1. That tire's been around forever, and we kind of say around in the office, like, we can't get rid of that tire because people keep on asking for it. And we're just like, it's been around for years, but the demand is still up. So it's like, why replace something when people still love it?
Hmm.
But that's usually the one that we recommend most for rain. It's got the best rain evacuation. It's a 9/32 tread depth, if I remember right. So it's got a lot of room for water evacuation on it. But as far as creative solutions go, I have seen people use the R888 as an intermediate. It's got kind of that symmetrical grooving on it,
Mm-hmm.
as well as the R888R. That one, I personally can't get behind. I very much prefer that tire in the dry versus the wet. I've driven it in both, but I've heard from some people that they actually like that one in at least like kind of damp or intermediate conditions. And then if you want to get more creative, a number of dealers and service shops offer custom grooving. And so we've seen some people take the RR or the RS1 and actually like take the RA1 pattern and just groove that into the RR or the RS1. It's a thing that we've seen done, and it's actually worked pretty well for some people. They were doing it at the 25 hours at Thunder Hill last year. So, and then you mentioned the street tires as well. Actually, we had a team that was running on the Proxys R1R in the wet out there too. It is, it's also a deep tread depth. It's got less of a contact patch because it has so much grooving in it. But it is another one where the water evacuation works out well. But still, at the top of my list, I would put down RA1 as our wet tire offering.
Yeah, that was looking through the product lineup and having driven on most of the Toyo competition product lineup, that was what I would have thought as well. But grooving tires, that's an interesting subject. I think, and Eric, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you or someone else posted a video recently of somebody grooving tires, and you see that a lot at events that have a tire supplier. I know vintage events a lot of times will actually do tire grooving where they're grooving like a compound that's not typically used as a rain tire into more of a rain tire, so you get a softer compound and still get water evacuation, which is pretty cool. So
Yeah.
there's some knowledge drops there for you. You've got lots of questions coming in. The last question that was sent in before the show is a good one. We'll get to that, and then I want to thank a couple folks for their support on the show because I meant to do that earlier. Completely forgot. But John Seegers also asked, why aren't full-on slicks the automatic go-to choice for a track tire?
If they were as cheap as the other tires that are out there, I think they would be everybody's automatic go-to choice. But the reality is, with a full-on slick tire, your initial price is going to be usually a bit heftier than DOT or street tire options. And on top of that, depending on, I guess, what sort of environment vehicle you're running, when you've got a full contact patch, like it's full slick, so you're getting maximum adhesion to the road, and you're stressing equipment and you're stressing that tire a lot more. So with the soft compound and the construction and design, not only are slick racing tires more expensive, they do have a tendency to wear out quicker than a street tire does as well. So, I often hear with like some slick racing tires, some teams or drivers like to do just the qualifying session and a race, or if it's a track day, maybe like one day on them, and then they're throwaways after that, or it's just they've dropped off in performance too much for their liking. But then if they throw on a street tire, yeah, it's not going to be as fast, but it's easier on equipment, and the tire can last for multiple days. So that's really the big exchange there, and it's for everybody. It's kind of figuring out what sort of balance of cost and performance that you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And the probably the biggest thing that I see is folks that end up going to a really sticky tire early on in their driving, and they get used to that grip level and
Bad move.
hard time going back. Yeah. It's an expensive one, and also you don't get a lot of the sensory feeling that you get on a street tire where the tire actually is going to slide more because it doesn't have that contact patch.
Yeah, that makes me think. I'm sure you've seen it in your racing experience, because it happens with everything in track days and motorsports and all that. Like I used to race go-karts, and I started in like the 80cc clutch karts that were like 20 horsepower or something. And I worked my way up, stepping up to different karts until I raced 125 ICC shifters when you're pushing like 50 or 55 horsepower. Anyway, 385 pounds, wet, and you're pulling about 3.5 Gs in some of these corners. They're freaking fast. And I've seen so many people that want to start at the top. And you see it in the track days too, where it's like they want to start with a slick tire, or they can afford I don't know, they can afford a McLaren, 720S or something, and like that's going to make me a better driver. I need to start with that. And a lot of people, nobody wants to swallow their pride and do the driver mod. But I swear, if you go for the fastest equipment first, if you jump into a slick tire or an R compound tire, having never done a track day before, you're going to develop some bad habits that you're really going to have to work yourself out of. So when it comes to tire selection specifically, if somebody's coming out to the track for the first time or their first couple times, I say just like run the OE tires, run what's on the car, because they're going to be the most forgiving, and just, have fun with it. Use that as your learning platform, and then kind of help yourself graduate up to the next levels as once they become your limiting factor, pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, there's a reason most racing schools you go to, the cars aren't on slick tires. They're all on street tires. And the other thing that comes out, and we were talking about this earlier, is that a lot of folks are getting into the track day path, right? The kind of common way to get into the sport now is the HPD world, right? And gain some education and some knowledge there. And then the budget enduro series is kind of the first wheel-to-wheel step for most people now. It's not the traditional racing school, club racing, keep going up the ladder path. And all of those series require a 180 or 200 tread wear tire, which requires the car to move around a lot more. And the skill is slightly different and the grip level is lower, and you have to go fast with a lower grip level. And that's something to consider. And you also mentioned the wear and tear on equipment. When you're running slicks on a car that's, especially a street car that's not designed for slicks, you're really going to stunt your learning curve and your growth if you do that too early, because you're going to start breaking stuff. You're going to start having a wheel starvation. You're going to baffle your oil pan. You're going to have to go to a dry sump. You're going to start spending all this money to accommodate for the extra grip. And it's just not worth it at that point in your learning curve.
Yeah. The faster you go, the more it just wears stuff out. That's just how it is. Like you make me think, for example, back when I was working at D Sport, we had a project, or it was my street car actually, the MD Miata, which I love and miss. I wish I still had that car, but I don't know if you've driven one, but they roll around quite a bit, and it feels like a soft car. And I don't think it's at a fault. It's how it adheres to the road. It's got lots of body flex, but even though you might sacrifice a little in response, when the chassis twists and loads on those outside tires, it's doing a lot of work in your favor to hold the car around a corner. So when I was looking around asking suspension and brake and tire companies and racing teams too, just like, what should our upgrade path be? Like, do we do sway bars first? We do brakes first? We do tires? And so I just threw it out there of just like, the car's totally stock right now. What if we wanted just that big jump of like 2 seconds a lap, and we wanted to throw some R compound tires on there? And the response on one team I was talking to, they said, well, if you want to see if the car can roll over, you can do that. Yeah. Every upgrade you do, you got to consider everything else that's affecting it. So there's got to be an order to it.
Yeah. Everything works as a system. And we talked with Johnny Chachowski of Nine Lives Racing, who makes aero systems. He builds wings, and we talked a lot about the approach to aero. And his whole thing is as it should be with aero. It's balance, right? It's add to the front what you add to the rear, right? It's kind of got to be even, and it's got to be with respect to the whole system. But going through the list of comments here, folks. Thanks a lot for being here. First of all, everybody, I wanted to thank Valvoline. I'm wearing their gear tonight, and Patrick Daugherty for supporting the show. Run some VR1 fluids if you guys aren't. They have zinc in their oil, which I don't know what kind of stuff you drive on a daily basis, Cameron, but I have a car with a Rover V8, which was designed in the 50s, and it has to have ZDDP or zinc in the oil to lubricate the top end and keep everything healthy. So I get to utilize a lot of Valvoline stuff, and also Valero, thanks to HMS Motorsport. It's an undergarment, temperature regulating undergarment that I've worn a lot this season. So those guys help make it happen. And Also, I saw Zach Shucker from HMS on here. Zach, I got to use the new TrackCom. I guess you saw the video that I made. Hopefully you saw it. Super, super cool. So thanks for that, guys. Pablo says he's running the RS4. The RS4 is very, very popular 200 tread wear. It's a hand cooked tire, and he's also got some AO52s. And maybe we can talk Pablo into some Toyos later on down the road. And then Eric Myers got a great question here. We all know Eric comes in with the good questions. He says, "What influence has COVID had on tire production and distribution?"
Oh man, that's been unpredictable. So I mean, the whole situation sucks for many reasons, but on the business side and on Toyo's side of things, it had us all a bit nervous, or me nervous, when all the racetracks started shutting down, and races had to be canceled or pushed back and everything. And so it's been interesting to see. On Toyo's side, thankfully we're pretty prepared for a situation like this, and on top of that, we introduced our open country AT3 tire kind of right in the middle of it just a couple months ago, which is a successor to like one of our best performing light truck tires that we've ever had. And so rolling that out was awesome, because everybody's going out and doing recreational things, outdoor activities and all that. So like all of a sudden this surge for demand for light truck tires came in. So it's like, cool, that end is taken care of. And then as months pass and tracks start to slowly open up with COVID safety guidelines, then I've seen among like the track days that we communicate with and the racing series, pretty much all the summer season, spring and summer season, like got packed into third and fourth quarters of the year. And now all these tracks, they have activity just every single day of the week. And on top of that, they're selling out like crazy. So, it honestly had me nervous around spring and summertime when all the activity stopped. But now that things are started again, it just moved. It's like we didn't lose customers or people falling out or anything. Everything just kind of shifted over. And now just everything is happening nonstop right now. So for that, I mean, I'm pretty grateful, and it's cool seeing people at the track, and it's cool seeing people, be responsible. Nobody wants to be the non-compliant organization that ruins racing for everybody.
Zero.
Yeah, exactly. So to see that all the racers and track day organizations have been, working well with all this, and just understanding that everybody wants to have fun, it's been cool. So yeah, I can't help but just kind of be positive and seeing how everything is kind of unfolded from a business and Toyo perspective, at least.
Awesome. Yeah, we definitely had some similar, saw some similar stuff with user data. We track who's using the app and when, not really who's using it, but when it's being used. And you can easily see that COVID slump. And then when the tracks reopened, right, it came right back and was stronger than it normally is during the times of year, during the August, kind of September timeframe. We got a couple of questions about heat cycles that I think we can knock out with kill two birds with one stone here. So we got a question from Bill Kring, and also a question from Zach Goldstein, and they're both asking about heat cycles. Zach is asking specifically how the heat cycles affect a street tire like a 200 tread wear. So I guess he's wondering, how long are they good for? When do they start to show, lose grip because of the amount of heat cycles? Bill is kind of fundamentally asking what constitutes a heat cycle, and then how many before performance drops. And in Bill's case, he's in a spec Miata, so I'd assume he's probably going to be on a Toyo product as well.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, it's funny. This was kind of a hot topic at the instructor summit, and I actually just answered somebody else's question. I think it was Eric Call that referred me to somebody that was asking about heat cycles. So I guess the first thing with like the number of heat cycles. So this question that came up on Facebook, for example, this person was asking how, basically what their problem was. They're running, some details are still missing, but they were running a tire at a given PSI on track, and they were wondering why at this pressure they got like 2 or 3 good solid laps, and then the tires started dropping off. And then they went out for another session, same exact situation, 2 or 3 laps. And then they went out for another session. This time it was like 3 or 4. And then on the last session of the day, then it was just perfect and dead even the entire session. So my response to that first was just, it sounds like he may have been cooking the tires a little bit. They may have been getting a little bit overheated. So they reached their optimal temperature. He got the great performance that he needed out of it. And then they started getting too hot. And then the lap times started stumbling. But there was that trend, how it kind of kept getting better and better. So one thing was, my recommendation for him was to help the tire last a little bit longer. Lots of our compound tires respond pretty well to a heat cycle with a 24-hour wait period before you use it again. So I know that some dealers and retailers will actually have like a heat cycling service that they do for you. Because I know it's hard for people to, you can't show up to the track and like sign up for one session and then like, I'm going to save these for tomorrow. Or if you are doing a track day, and stock up on your next set of tires beforehand. So bring them with you. And on that last session of the day, run them, heat cycle them, and then they're heat cycled for the next time that you go out. The reason being, lots of tires, if you heat cycle them once beforehand with that 24-hour waiting period, then you'll find that the longevity and consistency of that tire can actually be extended a bit. It's all very dependent on the tire, because every manufacturer's got their own, compound secret sauce. But I can say that, like, as kind of a blanket term, for the most part, that initial heat cycle can help out. And then, so as you said at the start of this, though, with my "it depends" answer, how many heat cycles are you going to get out of a tire? Are you driving a 1200 horsepower R35 GTR? Are you driving a B-spec Honda Fit? What's your driving style like? How stiff is your suspension? What's your car setup? It all depends. I've seen, in my running around to different track days, I've seen the same model and year C6 Corvette drivers. One example that comes to mind. One that was getting, he claimed, I think it was like 40 or 45 heat cycles out of an R888R. Whereas somebody else said that he was getting like 8. Same car. And both of them, if I remember right, were stock or close to it, but different drivers, different regions, different tracks. So a lot of it just really, really depends. So this kind of comes down to things of, you don't know until you have the experience, and you're not going to have the experience until you go out to the track, try things out, note things down, and start finding what is normal for you, what's expected for you, and then following those trends, and then seeing what you can do to just improve it or make it better somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with our business being focused on data and looking at a lot of drivers' data and reviewing their data and trying to help them go faster, I see the effects of, the forces in the different way that the car reacts, and the drivers have to react to different tracks. If you look at a friction circle from Gingerman Raceway in Michigan and a friction circle from Barber Motorsports Park, they're totally different. Gingerman is very flat, very little elevation change, and you see a lot of drivers that are not necessarily as skilled are able to get more out of the car and the tire, because there's less three-dimensionality to it. And so you have to, when you look at the friction circle, you can just see that the driver's using more of the tire, and you're like, well, they're probably wearing the tire a lot more than when they go to a track they're not as confident on. Or maybe it's the opposite, because they might not drive the car the same way, might do something totally differently at a different track. But what would you define as a heat cycle, Cameron? What do you say when someone says, like, what is a heat cycle? What is the technical response for that?
Basically, when you start with cold tire, you reach the operating temperature and it cools back down to near ambient. And I know that we start really, really digging into like fine details of, I got the tire up to 180 degrees, but then I only had, an hour in between sessions, and then it only dropped to like 130 or something like that. It's more of like, it depends, because there's not going to be a case where it's like, if it cools down below 145, that's a heat cycle. But if it stays above 146, then it's not. You do start entering some gray areas with that.
Right.
But, the way that most track days and track events run, if you leave the pits, you turn 5 laps, you get them up to the operating temperature, and then you pull it into the pits, check your pressures and temps, and then go right back out. I usually mark sessions, and when I'm marking tires, for me, that's still part of the same session, and the tire temps have not dropped down significantly, so I count that as the same heat cycle too. If you're at a race event or a race track, they usually separate your sessions out by 45 minutes, an hour, hour and a half, or 2 hours. And I can say that just as a rule of thumb, in most cases, if you've got 4 separate sessions on the schedule with any HPDE, there's a good chance, 90% of the time, each of those 4 sessions are going to be 4 separate heat cycles.
Yeah, that's great info. I'm really proud of myself because I answered in a comment to Bill's question, and I said I would define a heat cycle as getting the tire up to full operating temperature and then allowing it to cool to close to ambient.
Yeah, there you go.
So I felt pretty good about that. That was before your answer. I was trying to provide a different context. So I feel good about my understanding there. But heat cycles, very, very important. And you see a lot of people, again, that kind of reinforces what we talked about earlier, why you're not seeing slicks as the predominant go-to track day tire, because they just don't withstand as many heat cycles. You can heat cycle a lower grip tire in most cases a lot more. And some tires are designed for that, and they're not designed for all-out grip. But along those lines, Zach Shucker is wondering, other than an R888R, what tire do you recommend for high horsepower cars with mostly street driving? So a street-driven car looking for ultra high performance, being able to put down 500 horsepower. So,
if you're not going to put it on the track, the Proxys Sport is probably what I'd recommend. I've driven that on a Charger, my WRX actually, and something else I forget. But that's basically, it's a 240 treadwear tire. It's got a significant contact patch to it, so you've got the grip there, and I loved it in the wet too. So it's kind of good all-rounder that's still leaning towards the performance side and performance vehicle side. You'll see that most of the promos that have that tire, it's like Audi R8s and Corvettes and that kind of stuff. So that's kind of the area that it fits into. But I will say that if you're going to track the car, you got to accept the noise, the tire noise that comes with it, and jump over to the R888R, because that's the one where the car is going to feel real happy with it.
Yeah, awesome. Good info there. Mike Cooper jumped in. Mike runs a Spec 944. He's super quick.
Cool.
Mike is a Apex Pro dealer and ambassador and races with NASA Great Lakes, but he runs on the Toyo RRs. And I've driven Mike's car around NCM before I knew which way the track went, so I didn't go really quick, but I had a lot of fun. And that is a really communicative, easy tire to drive, I thought, for an R compound tire.
Yeah.
And I've driven him on a Spec Miata as well and some other stuff, but it's not a huge leap, I found, from a 200 tread wear to the feel of that tire.
Yeah, that's an area that I'm kind of surprised more manufacturers haven't gotten into. I guess I'll keep my fingers crossed that they don't. But it's such a cool middle ground. Like when we're mapping out what products that fill our line, we're picking out what voids need to be filled, what consumer audience needs a product that doesn't exist yet, or that needs extra attention or something like that. And this DOT motorsports formula, I love it because it combines that race car feeling of performance with relative affordability compared to other options. And so I've driven a few cars with the RR2, and it's just cool because it's grippy like a race tire, but it's forgiving like a street tire. And it really is just the best of both worlds. And I mean, in the development of that tire, which was largely with NASA and NASA consumers in mind, it's what sort of drivers are coming into this. Well, if we throw a full competition slick at them, a hardcore slick racing tire, it can snap out on you if you don't know what to expect. And so having a DOT slick or having an RR, it gives somebody like I said, that feeling of a race car, but it's so much more forgiving, and it can give more confidence to the driver. You can nearly drift the tire if you accidentally slip into some oversteer, and so you'll come out feeling like a hero driving that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I've had that experience both times that I've driven those tires, and they're the Spec 944 in the first place is a really communicative car. I mean, it's a telegraph about what it's going to do, and they are pretty challenging to get the most out of, but they're really fun. It works well with that tire. Marlon Sumlin jumped in, and he's talking about endurance racing. This is probably where I've spent most of my time on the competition side in the past couple of years. He's wondering about what as popular as enduro racing is now, is Toyo developing a new 180 to 200 tread wear tire. It seems like the Bridgestone being RE71, and there's a BFG that are dominating. I see a lot of Hankook RS4s. There's a Falcon. There's a, you name it, right? Everybody's in that game.
I think this is the part where I keep my lips zip tight shut. Yeah. But I can say that I've got a couple things in the works that I'm really, really pumped for, that I think some motorsports and track day people will be happy about.
So Marlon, stay tuned.
Yeah.
And be prepared to buy some Toyos, is what it sounds. Pablo jumped back on and is wondering, he said, wondering or considering what you said about the end of the usefulness of the tire, depending on the driver, how can I objectively tell when it's time to replace them? Use a durometer or just by feel and lap times?
Yeah, when we were talking about the heat cycle issue, I was actually just thinking that too. It's another it depends answer. Like what performance degradation are you willing to accept before you got to buy new tires? If you're racing a pro racing series and you're running on slicks, and if you have the budget for it, lots of those teams, they're going to say we do new tires every single session. For somebody that commonly does track days, they might say, okay, at Buttonwillow, I do a 208 or something on 13 clockwise, and I'm going to expect the tire to do well for the first 3-4 heat cycles, but then I might see a couple tenths drop off after that and a couple more tenths, and it's just like that internal clock. When do you want to call it? Do you want to call it when it's a second down? Do you want to call it when it's 2 seconds down? Do you want to call it, which I cannot recommend, but when you run out of tread? It's a tough one because it all depends. But you will see, most tires, especially our compounds, they can drop on like your typical 2.5 to 3 mile track. You can see at the end of its life, it might be a 1.5 to even a 3 second slower time per lap than when it was new. So it depends. Are you doing this to be competitive, or are you doing it for fun and just trying to stretch the most out of it you can?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it, is define what your purpose is, what's your intention, and what do you want to get out of the experience on the track. Is it just going to be frustrating that you don't have the grip that that you have? And if that's the case, then you should consider replacement sooner. But if you're just there to turn laps and you're going to be happy with that, or you can learn something, I think that's good practice as well, because you have to understand when the tire starts to lose grip, how to adjust your driving, because it does change. And that can help, especially if you're going to go race endurance stuff. If you're going to be running a 200 tread wear tire or something like that. Learning how to make lap time when you don't have a lot of grip can be really important.
Yeah, that was the boat that I was in, like coming up in racing too. Like, we had to run a cheat program, like when I was running open wheel cars, and then when I moved into fender cars. And my dad always just claimed that he was, training me to become a better driver by not getting me new tires.
Yeah.
But it does a lot for you, because it does help with your car control to understand how the car feels and handles at different stages of grip. And, it just has you better prepared for sessions, for different situations. I mean, and I've seen some people that just keep throwing money at it and new tires every single session. But then if you get a little bit of rain, or if you get dirt kicked up on the track, their response is like they've never experienced understeer or oversteer in their lives.
Right.
And then on top of that, it's kind of picking your battles, because we, would run, like when I was running the open wheel stuff, we would run like an 8 or 9 weekend race calendar. And it's like, okay, we've only got budget for maybe 4 sets of tires or 5 sets of tires this year. Where are we going to use them? So I would look at it myself and be like, okay, like Thunderhill, I suck at, or new tires, you know, isn't going to help me as much as, you know, when we go to Sonoma or something like that. So yeah, it's so much down to the owner and driver, but it's just picking and choosing what you're comfortable with, where and when you need it.
Yeah. Some of those questions are, you know, just the ones you need to know to ask yourself, I guess. And that's easier said than done, right? But that is an important consideration. Um, Dane Smith jumped in and said, how important is tread direction on the R888R on a dry track? Asking if swapping the front wheels could get me another weekend/day out of the set, smiley face, like that.
I'm sorry. Outside has to stay on the outside on these. Everything's designed to go in a certain direction. And it's not just down to, you know, what direction the grooves or what direction the arrows point at. It comes down to the construction too. So, you know, we always got to recommend in our way, whatever direction they say they got to be mounted on, that's the direction they got to be mounted on.
Yeah. And Dane's running an R35 GTR,
Nice.
heavier, high horsepower car. So, you know, the type of car that does use a lot of consumables, right? And so that's a big consideration going into race weekend, especially being all-wheel drive, because you get that front tire wear that you don't necessarily get as much in just a rear-wheel drive car. Folks
and noting that with the R888R real quick, that tire in particular, it's an asymmetric also, which means inside and outside matter because it's considering lateral forces and suspension setups. So you might, if you look at it, you'll see that it's got, you know, a thick groove that's off center, and you'll see that it's got a wider contact patch on one side than the other. And that is accounting for the suspension geometries on how the tire is going to, you know, curve in different directions when it's flexing up and down on that suspension. Yeah. And then how the like bottom surface of the tire is actually going to kind of roll in one way or another, depending on how you're cornering too.
Yeah.
If you try and flip them, you know, even on a new tire, it's going to perform much worse because it's just not designed for that.
Yeah. Well, that's good information, because there have been times, you know, most of the time slicks, right? It's a consistent tire across the entire surface of it, and you can usually flip them and have, especially, you know, we both have run front wheel drive cars. We would flip them on the rear because you would wear weird parts of the tire, because you would either be, and most of the time you would either be running a crazy negative camber or like zero camber to get the tire to do what you want in the corner, you know, which is principally kind of have less grip in a lot of situations because you need the rear to rotate, and there's different goals there. But something I was going to touch on that you might have some experience with, that I had had a lot of experiences with, because I drove a stock car, but I had this red Ford Taurus bodied 2004 Ford Taurus,
nice,
late model stock car, about 2,800 pounds, about 420 horsepower at the tires.
Nice.
It was a TA2 before there was TA2 car. We tried to run it in TA2, and that was the year that they no longer allowed the old style chassis designs. So it was a late model, super late model car. But one of the first events I went to, I think it was the second event I went to, was running some old tires. And it was, to your point earlier about, you know, what's your threshold? You know, I didn't have crazy budget, but we were running a tire that's a very high air volume, a bias ply construction Hoosier. And, you know, it was like $600 for a set. They're like the least expensive tires ever. And we had a set of new tires, but I went out to learn a new track. And by the end of the day, I felt pretty good, but I was like 5 or 6 seconds off what should have been a front running time. And we were making setup changes on the car, fighting it, and couldn't figure it out. And then the next morning slapped on a set of new tires and were within a second of what was a front running time. Right. And it was like overnight. And that was when I kind of learned the other end of that spectrum, which is like, until you really have that knowledge base built up, you know, if I had known that, and I'd known, don't make any setup changes because this is not the grip level you're going to be dealing with when you put the new tires on, you know, I would have saved myself a lot of heartache. But now I had to go undo all the anti-roll bar change that we made, and, you know, the alignment change that we made to accommodate for it. And it was kind of a hard lesson to learn. But with a tire like that, we saw consistently between, you know, a new tire and a heat cycled tire, more than 5 seconds at almost any track over a minute 40 or so lap time, you know, like a 2 mile track. But do you still see that? Because I know you run the newer Trans Am 2 car.
Yeah.
Do you still see that with those tires?
I made one of the biggest mistakes of my racing career just at this last race because of tire selection. We could get away with used tires at like SCCA club racing level and in a lightweight open wheel race car, because that car was like 1,300 pounds. And so we could kind of alternate new tires this weekend and the next weekend, and then we'll, throw on a new set for the next two. Um, in this TA2 class Camaro, our races are generally about an hour, 15 minutes. And I was trying to save a little bit of money, and there were some like kinks that we were working out of the car. So I'm just thinking to myself, do I want to try, wasting? Now I realize it wouldn't have been a waste, but do I want to waste money on a new set of tires at this race that's like an extended test bed for us? Well, it turns out that like everything on the car ended up working fine. This is at Sonoma. Everything on the car ended up working fine, and we're starting the race on a used set of tires. These tires have already been through another qualifying session and about an hour of racing. And so going into this, right from the get-go, right from the start, everybody else in the class was something like, I want to say 3, 4, 5 seconds a lap faster than I was. Now by the end of that, maybe like 45 minutes in, then my lap times started to catch up as they were slowing down.
Yeah.
But when you're talking, these hardcore racing slicks that are designed to be used for just one weekend for maximum grip, and you're running it for an hour at a pro level with 500 horsepower race cars, that's one of those cases where it's like, no, you're not going to be competitive unless you get new tires every time.
Yeah, and that's the reality, and a good thing to know going in. And like I said, when I was chasing a super loose car, it understeered and it was loose. I couldn't figure out what it was doing.
Everything's wrong with this.
Yeah, everything's wrong. And you stick new tires on it and it's perfect, right? It's fine. Everything's good. And now you're actually tuning your car. So there's the far end of that threshold where if you're the type of person, if you're sitting there watching this now and you're like, oh, that's not me. If you're the type of person that is going to push the heat cycles on your tires as far as you can before you have to buy your next set, and that's your mindset, if you're using as much brake pad material as you possibly can, just remember where the law of diminishing returns is there, right? Yeah. And there's sometimes a hefty consequence to pay for that, but also it's just a frustration consequence of you're trying to learn, and if you're not giving yourself the right tool, don't beat your head against the wall. Do one less track day and afford another set of tires, or do whatever it takes to make it right. Go out and do some driving for Uber, whatever you got to do, make a little extra cash to buy the tires.
Yeah. Like I was saying, like this is the kind of stuff that just comes with experience. You have to try it to see what happens. I remember with driving that Formula Mazda, actually, I noticed that the car would start handling differently as the tires wear down, because some cars might have a greater tendency to understeer or oversteer as the tires wear down. So that car, for me, it was kind of interesting. I noticed that for the most part, as things heated up and tires wore in the middle of a race, if anything, it would be the front end that starts going away. So I start pushing more and more going into corners. But in turn, something to do with maybe how the brakes were heating up or how the brakes would wear, it started becoming automatic to me to be sensitive to how the car felt under braking. And going into threshold braking zones, the rears would start to lock up. So at the start of the race, I would run bias set to this number, and then as I get deeper and deeper into the race, I have to start moving the bias towards the front end to keep the back end from locking up. It's like things like that, and setting up your car and knowing not to race two TA2 races on the same set of tires. Like you said, you can't beat yourself up for it. You gotta just put in the time and learn this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I shared this video on the beginner data page. So I wanted to touch on some of the tools that you brought. I know you've got notebook, tire pressure gauge, durometer, that sort of thing. But what are the data points that are important to you? Obviously, we got tire pressure and then tire temperature and that sort of thing. But respecting the fact that most of us, again, like you probably hear all the time, right? We don't all have pit crews, right? Most of us are doing this on our own, but give us some of kind of the hotkeys, the quick takes on what's important with taking tire temperatures and pressures, how to record that stuff. If you're running an Apex Pro, there's a notes section in the app where a lot of times I'm recording tire pressures or temperatures if it's something that's particularly important or a car that I drive a lot. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll say that like every track test I do, for example, There are three main sheets that I'm working to fill out. So one is a car setup sheet, and another one is the lap times sheet, and then the last one is the driver feedback sheet. So this stuff I recommend to just everybody that just has any intention of just being safe on track and to go faster. So the setup sheet, for example, like one that I use, I throw in my pocket. You can see it here. This one actually came from Pegasus, but I know that like Longacre and other brands have it. But it's a quick way to mark down, tire pressures, cold or hot. You can mark down tire temps, and then just marking the date, the time, what session, how many heat cycles are on the tires. Just as much information as you can. And on top of that, any chassis changes or pressure changes that you may be making. So include the note, increase PSI 1 pound or soften the rear sway bar so much. And then outside of that, lap times is an easy one, but another thing is feedback. So this is one I often refer to, and you can see it's asking, entry, mid-corner, responsiveness, whatever. At the very least, bring a notepad, bring a notebook, have notes on your phone. But after every session, as soon as you pull in off of the pits, be writing down your thoughts somewhere. And I tell people, like, when they come in and they park the car, they want to look at me and they start to say, so the car feels like this and this and this. And I say, don't tell me, well, write it down first.
Write it down.
Write down your interpretation, because if you ask me a question and I say anything, then I'm going to start leading your opinion in some direction.
Right.
Write it down, then talk it over with somebody, and then do the problem solving and analysis after that. But write down your feedback after every session.
And data can be subjective if you let somebody guide you on which data is important. So taking that data and putting it as unfiltered as it comes out of your brain as possible is really important. And I think the feedback sheet is not something that I've hit on a lot as we've discussed it, but I think that's extremely important. If you're in the position, if you're watching this now and you're going, I'm struggling to know what to do next on my car, or I don't know if I want to run a different tire or not, or a different brake pad. If you take that driver feedback sheet where it breaks down for you, how does the car feel on corner entry? How does it feel during braking? How does it feel mid corner? How does it feel on exit? And you force yourself to just go, it might start off super simple. I don't know, right? It feels weird. It feels stiff. It feels soft. It feels whatever, as simple as possible. Just the more you do it, the more you'll be able to describe it, and you'll start finding yourself using different terms and different ways to describe it. You don't have to know how to change the setup on your car. All you have to do is be able to describe that, because you can find somebody in the paddock or someone that you trust at the shop you use that knows a little bit about setup and show them that and say, this is what it's doing. I need help with that. And that can dictate your tire pressures. That can dictate all that type of stuff. So that setup sheet and that driver feedback sheet are very important. There's a couple of really good questions here. We got 3 more questions, and then we'll slowly start to wrap things up. I know it's always hard to get off because there's always some good questions. Mark Wood is wondering, what are your thoughts when people say you can use a DOT tire until it's nearly as slick as a slick racing tire? It can give you more grip like a slick, as the tread block won't move around as much. I think he's referring to once you've worn all the tread off of a DOT tire, is there any truth to it being able to give you more grip or not?
Yeah, we see it happen in some instances. For example, one of the reasons that the RR came into play, that tire was a follow-up to the RA1. It's very, very similar to the RA1, but instead of having all these rain grooves, these water evacuation grooves, it's slick, and it helps with the block rigidity, and it keeps things cheaper, because what people were doing with the RA1 is they were shaving that tire down to a 2 or 3 30 seconds of tread depth, because they were trying to do exactly that. They were trying to reduce the tread squirm. So there is some legitimacy to that. And I know that some products like the Nitto NT01, people love running them until they're slick. And as far as track rules for how much tread depth is required and this and that, like that's at your own discretion and up to them. But you basically do research, ask around the track, find out what works for what tires, because I can say that there are some tires where maybe the NT01 works well, running it down to near slick, but you do have a tread compound, and then you have the other rubber compound that's holding all the materials together, all the fibers and meshing and everything that's holding the tire construction. So if you go too far down, you might, it depends tire to tire, but you might be hitting that transitioning point where you're not running that, actual R compound rubber anymore, and you've dipped into the next layer, that layer that's not designed to, be driven on the street or especially on the track.
Yeah.
So it's just a thing to be aware of. But the block rigidity, if you isolate that, that's absolutely a thing. Reducing tread squirm can be advantageous depending on the tire design.
Tread squirm. I've never even thought that would be a term, but that's interesting. That makes sense. The tread blocks move around.
Yeah.
I would tend to think that that's probably not the case on a all-season street tire or something like that. I don't know that for a fact, but would you assume that would also work on like a very normal streetable tire?
Yeah, on all seasons, it starts to get a little gray there too, because those they're not designed to be shaved, obviously, and they're the tread block designs. If you take a good look at some of these tires, you'll see that actually the tread blocks can change shape as you wear further and further down. So some of them might actually have that tread squirm element in mind. So as it wears down from this point to this point, it might open up stuff here and close stuff up there to just maintain the same level of performance as much as possible.
Interesting.
So yeah, I would say you can shave tires on some track day tires and some race tires, depending which ones you're doing it on. But on street tires, I say just leave it alone.
Yeah. Awesome. Dane Smith's asking, is there any rule of thumb for suspension settings when you migrate down from a 300 tread wear tire to something like a R888R with 100 tread wear? As in probably something easily adjustable like rebound or compression, if you have double adjustable shocks, maybe even sway bars.
Yeah, this is a case where you probably talk to some suspension gurus on that stuff. But as you increase the performance of your tires, it's going to encourage your car to lean and roll more, because the tires are hooking up and you've got all that sprung weight trying to move one way or another. So you're probably going to be combating that to a point where you're going to be looking at stiffer sway bars, stiffer springs, and and then tuning some of that stuff out with the shocks. So I could say that's probably the general direction you'd be looking toward. And from, what do you say, 300 to 220?
Yeah. 300 to an R888R, 300 tread wear.
Oh, an R888R. That is a little bit more of a significant jump. So yeah, I'd be looking at notably stiffer suspension and chassis setups for that.
Yeah, Dane, depending on what adjustability you have, I noticed you said rebound and compression. I would probably move, if you haven't already. Shock adjustments obviously are easy to make. You can go ahead and start dialing it into stiffer rebound and stiffer compression. I could speak to that on recent experience going the other way. Actually, I own part of a race car. It's an E36 M3, was set up on slicks for BMW club racing. And now we're running it on a 200 tread wear, not a super high grip 200 tread wear. We usually run the RS4 Hankook. And so it required a lot of softening, right? Because you just don't have the same amount of grip and you can't get as much out of the tire. And probably another reason to work with a Toyo product. I actually need to buy some tires to do some racing soon with another group, and we'll probably be looking at something in the 200 tread wear range, or would be very interested in using a Toyo in that environment. But we had to dial back so we ended up going, I think, 4 or 5 clicks out. We only have single adjustable shocks, but we went softer all the way around, and the car immediately went quicker. It was overwhelming the tire. If I had to give my driver feedback, it would have been like I turn the wheel and the chassis is really eager to go, but then it automatically kind of puts the tire into a slide, and the chassis is overwhelming the tire almost. So you kind of have to match everything up. It's like this game where you're trying to get everything to play in synchrony. You kind of just synchronize everything together.
See, that's pretty much how it was when when you run a rain setup too. You just automatically go like pull the bars, change out the springs, just like soften everything as much as you can, because you've got less grip that you're working with. So
yeah, and don't think of softer as worse. In a lot of cases, most, in my experience, the people that I've been around from a suspension side of things tend to like soft springs and stiffer sway bars, to let the chassis roll, because part of that body roll is what creates grip. You have to match the chassis with the tire again. But running a 200 treadwear recently, we ran no sway bars on an MX-5 up at Charlotte, and the car was just as fast without sway bars as it was with them on. It was just sketchier with the sway bars on. It just responded quicker. It was more willing to break traction mid corner. It was actually a little better without them. And that's something that most people don't think about. I had a question here about a parameter. What parameter do you recommend using, needle versus laser? So that's the needle for sticking tires, or the laser that everybody puts on your forehead before you go in a restaurant during COVID?
Actually got some of this stuff out too. One I use is a Intercomp. Longacre actually has a really good one too, and I strongly recommend them both. The common element in both is that they use the probe. Strongly recommend that over a laser type. So I'll say in my box of goodies, I do bring the laser with me everywhere, just in case, it's my backup. But the information that you get from a probe type pyrometer is monumentally more useful than the laser information. I've heard some people describe it as, it's just, why do you want to measure the temperature of the dirt on the surface of the tire? When you are using a probe type and you're, actually getting it inside the rubber, it's not just touching the surface. You're trying to see what the rubber compound temperature is. You're not trying to see the surface temp. You're trying to see what the compound temperature got up to, because that's telling you if you reach the operating temperature or not. So that one, absolutely by far most recommended. Just I can't emphasize it enough. Just probe type so much more than a laser. It's going to help a lot if you have a memory one too, because you're going to be measuring outside, middle, and inside of 4 different tires. And I don't know, when I'm in the heat of the moment, I can't memorize that much information. So
yeah.
So get one with memory too. It'll be a big help. And honestly, being able to read your tire temps just unlocks a whole world of information in setting up your car. It's going to tell you so much about your driving. It's going to tell you about your suspension setup. It's going to tell you about your alignment. There's just a ton of information in there. So every test, every event I go to, any event that I'm racing in, I bring with me a box that's got the pressure gauge and 2 different tire temperature readers, one being a laser and one being the probe, always leaning toward the probe.
Yeah, I would think of it as, the measuring the temperature on the surface of the tire is what the laser parameter is doing. I was working an event recently for Porsche, having people out to Barber Motorsports here at Barber Motorsports Park, doing a corporate event, and folks were coming in, and I had to take their temperature because it's coronavirus, and we need to know if they have right. But there's a lot of people using the infrared, gun, so I'm looking at people's foreheads. Well, depending on what their air conditioning was set to, changes the surface temperature of their skin, right? So some people get out of the car and it's 95 degrees, right?
Yeah.
Which is below what your 98.6, right? Should be normal. So I guarantee you, if we were to stick a thermometer in their mouth, it'd probably be 98.6, 98.3, 99.1, right? So it's the same exact thing. It's measuring what you really want to measure versus the surface of what you're trying to measure. And that makes a really big difference. When you mentioned some of the, taking tire temperatures and pressures, documenting all that stuff, for a lot of folks watching that are doing more track event stuff where you're non-competitive, but you either want to be competitive or you just want to learn more about what's going on, invest in a parameter and potentially look into services like Corsa Crew, who we work with a lot here. Cameron, he goes to tracks and he'll for $100, he'll do the tire temperature and pressure service for you, and he'll meet you on pit lane. He'll give you the whole, he'll tell you what to do. Yeah. That's a great option. In that case, you don't have to buy your parameter. If you want to do it yourself and learn the art and the craft, and you don't want to spend $100 all the time to do that, then do it, once a weekend, twice a weekend. Don't make it an overwhelming task. Learn what the temperatures are like first thing in the morning, learn what your tires are doing, assimilate enough information that over time you can build the whole story and enough, but don't feel like you have to do it every session all the time. If you're competitively racing and you're going through a lot of tires, you probably are doing it every session all the time. You probably have a guide there to help you do that. which makes life a lot easier in that case. I had a great engineer when I was running World Challenge, and instead of me filling out my own feedback sheet, I'd just come up, I'd be blabbing on the radio, I'd get out of the car and say all this stuff, and he'd just be writing it down. I
Yeah.
wouldn't even having a conversation. I'm just talking, right? And then he's telling me my feedback notes to me, right? And everybody's style is a little bit different, but however you got to get to that information, it's all really valuable stuff. Dane says, very helpful. Thank you.
Cool.
Awesome. Matt had a question here, and we touched on it really briefly earlier, but this might be a good one to wrap things up on. He said, what are your thoughts on having tires heat cycled prior to delivery or scrubbing them in once one event prior to when you plan on using them?
Yeah, good route to go. I like it. In some types of events, like if you're running a slick tire, like when I'm running the TA2 stuff, it's not going to make much of a difference for me. So when we qualify, we go out on stickers, and then we have to run that same tire in the race. So we don't heat cycle it beforehand. But on some of our compound stuff, when you're talking like DOT race tires or some of the 200 treadwear tires, it can make a difference. I'll say in most cases, it's not going to make you faster, but it's going to let the tire hold its handling characteristics for longer, more consistently too. So if somebody offers that surface, or you're going to, if you're able to take it to the track, an event prior, not much reason not to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's awesome information. Well, Cameron, what do we need to know going forward about Toyo? How do we follow along what's going on? I was just on the website looking at some off-road tires because I have a Land Rover that I've been working on that's my daily, and I've got some decent all seasons, but I'm going to need to pick up some off-road tires here before too long. So nice. I was looking at the product range.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's cool here is that we offer a bit of everything. I mean, we've even got tires for semi trucks if you've got a hauler that you need tires for. But the big hitters that have just recently come out is our Open Country AT3. So if you've got a truck that you want to just kind of do everything, that's our big one right now. And we've got 680 million sizes for that tire. So there's a good chance whatever you're running, we have the size for it. So yeah, that one's the Open Country AT3. For the street cars, my personal favorites I'm driving on, right now I have the Proxys Sport ASs on my WRX. I came from Proxys Sports, and then I was testing out our Celsius all-weather tire for a while. And the Proxys Sport AS is kind of, called a sporty all season. It's one that basically has me feeling cool and confident in the rain, but every now and then when I come across a banked corner or any of that, I can still kind of play around with the car. And same as the AT3, the Proxys Sport and Sport AS both come in a bunch of sizes. So those are my top two recommendations right now. Anything else that they need, they can go to toyotires.com or check out our Instagram, Toyo Tires, and then our more like grassroots and track day and racing stuff, Team Toyo USA.
Team Toyo USA. Awesome. Yeah, Toyo is one of those companies, like we started the show off with. You're not a behemoth of the tire industry, but you're punching above your weight and doing a lot of really cool stuff. And what'd you tell me before, how many spec classes Toyo supports? It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, we got something like 13 classes with NASA, but we also got spec classes with POC, BMW CCA. There's a Spec Miata class that's running Toyo spec tire, so it's all over the place.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really impressive, and I've enjoyed the products a lot. I get to drive a lot of different tires and a lot of different stuff, and it's funny being in that position. And a lot of people can probably relate. You remember the tires that you drive. Drivers and racers at the track are like, oh yeah, I can tell you exactly what it felt like, and it's hard to remember your anniversary, but you can remember that. The tires make a lasting impact. So folks, next time you're looking for a brand of tires, think about Cameron and some of the information that he shared with you. Cameron, if people want to get in touch with you, what's a way that you don't mind people reaching out for more info?
Yeah, Instagram's probably the best place to hit me up, and that one's Cam Drives Cars. Feel free to send me a message, slip into my DMs.
Awesome. I'll post that in the comments here. And then we saw Toyo Tires. I'll post a website link and all that stuff because I was looking at the Open Country AT3. I just pulled it up in my other browser to check it out. That's pretty cool. Does Toyo do anything other than tires? Or any other rubber products or anything like that?
That's why in Japan there's a Toyo rubber Incorporated or something like that. But here in the U.S., we're doing just tires, just a little bit of every kind of tire you can think of.
Gotcha. Yeah, I always found it interesting. Like Bridgestone makes golf balls, right? It's like
Yeah,
you got rubber competency, you can make rubber, right? That's how it works.
Yeah,
That's
pretty
cool.
much. I mean, I think the most left field thing we do might be the side by side tires. So we do have the Open Country SXS side by side, and that's just in 32 inches. But that's a cool deal too. It's like a miniature racing MT that we have now for
Yeah.
side by sides. So
Very cool. Well, I'm going to be shopping around for some Toyos because I'm not super happy with the tires on my truck right now. But I'll have to wear them out first. But I can make that happen pretty quickly.
I get that. Yep.
Yeah. All righty. Thanks a lot for joining us. Appreciate all the questions, Facebook. Support the people that support us, and stay tuned in for more information. We're actually going to be back next week with HMS Motorsport talking about helmets, doing a little Motorsport Safety Live. We do a monthly safety conversation with Joe from HMS Motorsport, who wrote some of the SFI regulations. He also does a lot of testing with NASCAR, develops the seats and harnesses for Schroth, brought Stilo to the U.S. They've done some awesome stuff, and proud to call them a partner. So thanks for being here, Cameron, and we'll have you back on in the future to talk more tires.
Sounds good.
All righty.